For those of you who have been living under a rock, Squid Game is Netflix's new massively popular South Korean show, in which various indebted characters partake in a series of deadly variations on popular childhood games in an attempt to win a large amount of money. The show itself is largely well written, well acted, well shot, well edited, etc., and while the English dub leaves something to be desired, the show's breakout success is no fluke. It's damn good. There's rough patches here and there, but ultimately it's a great watch. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and so did everyone else I've spoken to about it. The creative set pieces, deeply emotive acting, and rather obvious themes and subjects have resulted in the series being easily memeable, and people all over the political compass have been having fun with it, with mixed results. One particular political camp that has been quite vocal in this regard are the tankies, lefties, commies, and socialists, who've all managed to take the grand, deeply emotional, poignant questions about the human condition that the show poses and compress and bastardize them into, haha, capitalism bad. This video will contain spoilers, by the way, so if you haven't watched the show yet, I highly recommend that you do so before continuing unless you're happy to be spoiled. Anyway, the main argument from the anti-capitalist left when it comes to Squid Game seems to be as follows. These people are forced into debt and are forced to murder each other in order to try and get out of it. Isn't capitalism evil? Now, there's a great deal wrong with this, so let's break it down bit by bit. First of all, none of the characters in the show are described as being forced into debt. The main character, Song-gyun, is a gambling addict who borrowed money and then gambled that money. That's his own fault. No one forced him to do it. His childhood friend, Cho Sang-woo, stole money from his investors and gambled it on risky options plays which didn't pay off, and he used property he didn't own as collateral, which is not only illegal and immoral but also stupid. Kang Sae-byuk is a thief who tried to illegally smuggle her family across the border from the terrifying authoritarian communist shithole North Korea into the economic freedom of the capitalist South, aka Best Korea. This is at least understandable, but it is still illegal, and she is, after all, a thief, a pickpocket. This is not something she was forced to do. Abdul Ali, finally a character who actually has had a bad time thrust upon him, at least in part, an immigrant worker who is injured in an industrial accident. He receives no compensation for his injury, and that certainly can be seen as a criticism of capitalism. However, it's unsure exactly how much, as we aren't actually given that much information. We don't know, for example, if the accident was his own fault, if perhaps he is supposed to take his boss to court, but doesn't know necessarily how to navigate the legal system in this foreign nation, etc. There's a lot up in the air, but one thing is for certain, his boss is in fact taking advantage of him. He hasn't been paid, and the boss refuses to pay him, despite actually having the money. This is illegal and immoral. Any moral capitalist would happily say, yep, that guy is a terrible boss and a criminal, and sue his ass. However, in a tussle, the boss gets similarly injured and Abdul flees, joining the games, so I guess it's a moot point, really. Jang Dok-soo is yet another gambling addict and a member of a criminal organization to boot, so yet another person who was not in any way forced to get into debt. The only real victim here is Abdul, and despite the capitalism equals evil crowd's protestations, he would likely ultimately have been compensated in this capitalist system if he'd addressed his grievance through the appropriate channel. I guess we'll never really know. So what do we have so far? These individuals were not in any way forced into debt by capitalism. Their own decisions resulted in them being in these situations, and capitalism actually provides them with the tools necessary to escape their bondage by working, starting a business, etc. There are many viable options, but they have chosen instead to break the law, to run from their obligations, etc. This is in no way the fault of capitalism. So, really, the commies have fallen at the first hurdle, but let's see just how much else they've also gotten wrong, shall we? What about the other important part, being forced to partake in the games? Well, as the old man Oh Il-nam states in his final scene, None of you were forced to play. You all put your signatures down, and you all chose to rejoin the game of your own free will. That last part is especially important. While it could potentially be argued that they initially didn't really know what was in store for them, when they chose to disband the games but then elected on their own to return, they did so with full knowledge of exactly what these games consisted of, and their potentially deadly nature. It is also hard to justify the notion that they didn't really know what would happen in the first place. They were drugged and transported somewhere they didn't know before the games began, and men with guns were present while they were told about the games. This was clearly high stakes, and they had all already been primed with the idea of potentially paying for losses in the organization's games with their bodies by the slapping game. They are initially challenged to a simple one-on-one game in which they have as many chances as they would like to win an amount of money, but every time they lose, the winner gets to slap them. The main character is shown being slapped repeatedly due to his losses, meaning that he happily accepts the physical punishment in exchange for an opportunity to earn money through the game. They all knew what they were doing, and they were fine with it. This is the essence of capitalism. Everyone involved consents. They agreed to play. They were given the opportunity to stop playing at any time, and they voluntarily chose to play once more, deciding that playing was better than not. It's all voluntary. And remember, this wasn't their only option. They can also just, work. But they were given the opportunity to wipe out their debts and become fabulously wealthy without a significant investment of time or effort on their part, just the chance that they might die, and they clearly felt that it was more than fair. Obviously, otherwise they would have turned it down. So the debt was their own fault, the games are voluntary, they are given the opportunity to stop playing whenever they like, and they choose independently to rejoin the games after they are disbanded. This is in no way any kind of anti-capitalist message, or rather, if it is a nonsensical one. The players may be immoral people, may have made bad decisions, and the games may result in people's deaths, but the games themselves are voluntary, and are in no way a negative reflection on capitalism. The deeper, significantly more important, and more sensible theme in Squid Game appears to be that which is expressed by Oh Il-nam in his final scene in the question to Song-gyun, "Tell me, do you still trust humanity to be good?" In fact, their final game, Will Someone Help the Homeless Man, is a microcosm of this exact theme. The question of humanity's goodness is an existential one. We've just witnessed a series of games in which people betrayed one another for a chance at wealth, where the rich are betting on the lower classes for fun, where criminals murdered one another for slightly better odds, and we are asked, is humanity still good? And the answer is obviously yes. Someone helps the drunk, because ultimately, in a capitalist system with plenty of prosperity to go around, people are capable of helping their fellow man. In fact, capitalism is predicated on the idea that we will benefit one another necessarily by providing for one another goods and services in exchange for other goods or services, or a medium of exchange like money in a way determined by both parties to be mutually beneficial. No one is preventing any of the characters from being moral, except of course the writers. The commies seem to think that just because you have to pay for things like food, that capitalism is therefore immoral. But ultimately, yeah, you have to pay. Even finding food in the wild requires you to expend energy and effort to harvest it, cook it, and consume it. There's no such thing as a free lunch. But capitalism has allowed for the greatest ability of mankind to produce, store, and consume food and other resources that we have ever seen, successfully lifting billions out of poverty and improving the living standards of our fellow men across the globe. Anyone who thinks that Squid Game is anti-capitalist propaganda either doesn't understand capitalism or doesn't understand Squid Game.